Hi BookTube and welcome to a new video. This is a Friday Reads for 6 books, and then at the end, since we're just into the second half of the year, I'm going to give my 6-month reading review, which is mainly made up of statistics. But first we'll talk about the books I've read in the last week and a half. Delphi by Clare Pollard. The City Changes Its Face, the new novel by Eimear McBride. The Möbius book by Lacey. Marigold and Rose by Louise Gluck. Spanish writer Aliocha Coll, Attilla. And finally New Zealand author Pip Adam, Audition. So I'm going to start with Clare Pollard's Delphi. So this is a plague journal, the plague being COVID and the lockdown, and it's done in very short chapters, each with a divination theme, be it divination by clouds, by animal entrails, by blood, by tea leaves, scrying. She also herself, during lockdown, visits with online both tarot and I Ching, and each of these chapter headings, titled after a different form of divination, sort of feeds into her narrative, where she's just narrating, and this is a novel, it's not a memoir, feeds into her narration of she's a translator and has obviously lost a lot of work with lockdown. And she and her husband are both obviously forced home to work from home, but they have a young son who is badly asthmatic, so they're very worried about him and sort of shielding him. And of course the sort of claustrophobia of being forced together brings out all sorts of tensions, and it's just brilliantly done in the way it's structured and tailored to each of these sort of forms of divination. Because what we all want to know is what our futures hold for us. And of course, this is the time, really, that when sort of data scraping from our online use and our phone use really comes to the fore, and offers a whole new sort of sphere of prediction, whereby the data is used to predict what we will consume, how we will vote, and manipulations of both thereof. It's just fabulously done. I mean, I love books like this, which are sort of, they don't have a sort of conventional narrative, but the narrative is sort of structured by its headings, each title's headings. And there's just some great writing as well. So to give you an example of that, so she herself finally succumbs to COVID and gets it and is quite ill with it. And so she's lying in bed watching TV and stuff. There's so much Christmas TV, so many list shows, TV of the 80s and 90s. It's like they're saving those dying all the effort and unpleasantness of having to have their own lives flash before their eyes. I just thought it was brilliant. There's lots of insights like that. Terrific stuff, 5 stars. And on to Eimear McBride, who's an author I really have trouble with. On a sentence level, there are few better than her, but her books themselves leave me cold, and this is no different. On the novel level, it seemed to me a revisiting of the characters from her book The Lesser Bohemians. So The Lesser Bohemians, it was an older actor and a far younger girlfriend who I think was also at drama school. In here we have an older actor, although he is now turned into filmmaker, and a 19-year-old drama student. So exactly the same characters. Not only that, they in Lesser Bohemians, they lived in Kentish Town in London. Here they live in Camden Town in London. And if you consult a tube map, they're on the same tube line. They are one station removed from each other. Literally, they're the next stop. And I didn't like Lesser Bohemians. I particularly didn't like the characters there, and they're sort of revisited here. So already she was off to a sticky start. So as I say, we have an older actor and we have his 19-year-old girlfriend, and they seem to be in a good relationship until his daughter, who went to Canada with her mother when his wife divorced him, so he hasn't seen her for a long time. She has obviously wanted to seek out her father and has come over and is staying with him. And one of the sort of upheavals that involves is that he and his 19-year-old girlfriend aren't having sex. And the girlfriend puts it down to the psychological equivalence that he sees, because they're of similar, there's 2 years difference between their ages, that she's no longer a lover and partner and sexual mate. She's of the same status of a daughter and obviously can't be touched, which infuriates her, and everything seems to go downhill from that. The way the book is structured is there's a lot of cutting across time, going backwards and stuff, and their relationship is in trouble. We see a lot of the microaggressions, we see a lot of the disenchantment, and as I say, I didn't like the characters originally, and these are slightly different characters because it turns out that both of these characters have sort of past traumas, that he was a serious heroin addict, which he's managed to kick the habit and reinvent himself, so props to him for that, and she has her own trauma. But in the way that the book is written, this is revealed to us, not through the characters talking to each other, but his heroin habit is documented in a film where the character of him, the addict, is played by his messmate called Danny, who's an actor who the woman knows, and the woman's called Eimear. So she and the daughter, who's called Grace, they basically sort of say, why have we not seen this film? Why have you kept it from us? You promised Grace the script to read through, you never sent it to him. And in the end he says, okay, well, come and see a screening of it. It's not yet fully finished, it's not fully edited. So his past, his trauma is revealed not through him talking to either the daughter or his partner, but through a film that he's made about it. He can only express himself through art. And we get this long sort of 80-page section of they're in the projection room watching the film, and the film is sort of described to us, the reader, in italics. So again, the character doesn't seem able to express himself except through his art, and eventually Eimear gets her revenge, or tit for tat. I mean, she's not seeking revenge, but she shows him a journal that I don't think he knew that she was keeping, where she talks about her trauma. So both of these characters can't talk to each other except through art. They expose and reveal themselves to each other through art. But that's not really an authentic, sincere, grounded form of self-expression in an intimate setting. Because art involves, truth stretching, poetic license, metaphor, all these sorts of things. I just found it very strange that these two characters could only express themselves to one another through art. So I found that unsatisfactory. Just to give an example of the brilliant writing and why I find her so frustrating, because as a writer she's second to none, as a wielder, a wrangler of words. Sorry, say again? Where did you want to get back to, Isle? I don't know. To how much simpler I was, perhaps. I don't remember you being simple. How do you remember me? Well, I'd say you were more hard work. Lovely. But hard work I couldn't resist. You can't unsay it now. Backpedal all you like. I don't want to backpedal, Isle. In fact, I'd add, there was nothing. What? You wouldn't come out with nothing you wouldn't ask. And yet they're only able to sort of express themselves through art later. Anyway, so I was nosy too. Undeniably. Right. Like how? Like, how many women have you slept with? It was a valid question. Maybe, but I'd never met anyone who didn't know not to ask. Really? Yes, who just asked and expected an answer. Now I'm mortified. Don't be. You were lovely. Lovely? and you, a person like that, like you, to me, you mean a fucking idiot. I didn't say that. And besides, it worked. Worked how? Well, we're here, aren't we? I suppose. You see, then it wasn't so bad. So that's fairly standard sort of dialogue between two lovers, getting to the, that sort of perennial question of what do you know about their past sexual partners, etc., etc. It's a bit sickly, now I'm mortified, don't be you were lovely. This is early on in the book, so it's sort of portraying them still in very much in love kind of thing. So, there's nothing particularly remarkable about that. But then the next section, this is where we get her astounding word use. Rye advance into glances across the bridge. Eyes meet to mock audit our various hits. Find we are nick wounded only. So smiles linger a sec. Then he drinks more of his beer while I rest my cheek on his cold leg, which I find I am allowed. And the night isn't so far gone. I'd bloom at its promise if it weren't for Kentish Town, the dreaded chords sitting above. Maybe I should go further back. So there's some extraordinary word sort of combinations there. Eyes meet to mock audit. That's a lovely phrase, mock audit. Find we are nick wounded only. That these are minor, very minor scrapings. They're not going to sort of compromise and change their view of one another. So that's almost the commentary on the dialogue that I read just before it, and it's brilliant. But the characters are not great, the situations are not remarkable. It's fairly standard relationship stuff, and it's a slightly sickly relationship of an older man and a younger woman. I will say that they were more likeable than they were in Lesser Bohemians, where there were no redeeming characteristics in the two characters. Here they were not so dislikable, but then you get that strange 80-page confessional documentary or film. It's not a documentary because it's got an actor, but film. And that made me not like them again because they're unable to be honest with one another, to speak openly. So, I'm so frustrated with Eimear McBride because she's got all the tools, but somehow, for my personal taste, can't put it all together in a book that I really want to read. So I think I gave it 3.5 stars because the writing's great and the book is not so great. And on to the Möbius book by Catherine Lacey. So I held this up in my last videos to books that I was looking forward to being published, and between now and the end of the year. And this is one of them. And if you don't know what a Möbius strip is, look it up. But it's basically something sort of loops back on itself so that it never ends. It sort of would have sort of continuous motion if there wasn't friction. And this book is sort of like that, in that part is that way up, and then you have to turn the book round for the blue side for it to be that part. Now, one of them, I think the red in this case, is the fiction, and the blue one is the non-fiction. Now, I didn't know that going in. I randomly happened onto the red, the fiction, and in a way I'm glad I did. I think I lucked out that way, because what this book showed me was why I would always veer to a fictional treatment of something rather than a non-fictional treatment, such as a memoir or biography or whatever, even though when it's done in McBride's through a film being described in a book, it didn't work at all. But anyway, here it really made me appreciate why I always veer towards fiction. So the fiction version sees a lesbian who was married and had twin children with her wife, but was unfaithful, though I saw it as a kiss rather than sort of full-on sex. But anyway, that can be viewed as infidelity. And her wife leaves her and takes the children away. And the problem is that it's not just her wife and children that she's lost, but she was originally introduced to her wife by the wife's sister, who she was in a tight friendship group from university with another woman. So she's also lost that friend. So there's only one friend in the original threesome left for her. And that woman comes to visit her to see how her friend's doing. But she herself, this friend, has just got out of a relationship with a man. So it's just the two of them in the lesbian woman's apartment through the night in New York, just talking. And it starts off with, through the spy hole in her door, she sees what looks like blood pooling underneath the front door of an apartment on her floor. And that stands as a metaphor that sort of permeates and percolates the whole of this novel section, and that introduces a whole level that the non-fiction version doesn't have, and that's why I think it makes it superior, to me at least. That's why it makes for a more engaging read, because I'm all the time wondering, is she going to go back and investigate that pool of blood? Because she's only seen it through the spy hole. What does it mean? What does it imply? And between the two of them, there's lots of sort of great observations about relationships, but it's tight. It's a twosome. It's just the two of them, even though they're sort of going back in their memory and stuff. So it's really sort of tightly plotted, as it were. And I loved it. I thought it was great. There's another sort of extended metaphor where a cup is accidentally dropped and smashed, and the friend is determined to sort of glue it back together again. And even if she does, is it going to be watertight? Is it going to be able to hold the liquid? So that's the fiction part. The non-fiction seems to pertain to details of Lacey's life, where she was left by her husband, who was very much controlling. Didn't seem to start out that way, but increasingly the relationship got more and more controlling. And she couch surfs amongst her friends once the marriage is over. And again, she gets all these bits of advice from her friends, but the friends also, most of their relationships seem to be failing. But it's because it's lots of different friends in lots of different apartments, and literally on their sofas, it's much more diffuse and dissipated from the focus of the novel. And again, the novel half, the non-fiction half. And again, that's why I say I much prefer reading a fictional treatment than a non-fictional. And they're not quite telling it the same way, because in the fiction, it's a lesbian couple who've broken up, whereas the non-fiction, it's a husband and wife. But it's dealing with the same stuff. It's human relationships, right? So I didn't think it was a great book overall, but I did appreciate that it sort of made me think, why is the novel part so much more effective and affecting than the non-fiction part? So for that, I give it 4 stars, because it really made me sort of reevaluate and try and come up with what it was in the difference between the two treatments. It's definitely a worthwhile, interesting read, I feel, but it's not a great book. So as I say, 4 stars. And on to Marigold and Rose, a fiction by Louise Gluck, who's mainly known as a poet. And what a charming read this is. It's incredibly short, it's about 60 pages long, and it's about twin girls in their first year of life, who obviously are pre-verbal, but obviously this is written, so it is sort of a linguistic treatment. And being twins, it's their sort of, what have we in common, what was different. They also end up having different alliances with their parents, so one twin is very much allied with the mother and the other is very much allied with the father, and all the time they're sort of plotting and trying to probe the relationships with each other, as I say, where they differ and where they're similar, but also plot the relationship with the parents. And it's just utterly charming. It's not sentimental, because normally I would not enjoy a book of sentimentality. It's just a fabulous, small, modest, but touching read. 4.5 stars. And on to Aliocha Coll, Attilla. So Coll wrote this. This was his final book. And he was very much a writer in his own lifetime who was so sort of extreme and avant-garde that he didn't have much of a following. And indeed, soon after this, he committed suicide. So what is this book about? I couldn't tell you. All you can do, really, is bask in its extraordinary visionary metaphors and descriptions. Chapter 3 gives it a sort of a historical grounding. and it's Attilla is at the gates of the Western Roman Empire, and we have a couple, one called Quixote, and I can't pronounce the wife's name. They are both poets, and both what's left of the Western Roman Empire and Attilla are both making embassies towards this couple, that they have to sort of choose one or the other to help win the final battle between these two great armies. And the book starts off with a sort of stage play. There's poetry, because we have two poets as the main characters. But as I say, it's really the descriptions and the metaphors. Some of the descriptions of the sky and the landscape are just stunning, and it's sort of word poetry. It's not actually done as poetry in the main, it's done as prose. But that is, for me, the real value of this book, is the language and the metaphors and the visions. It is a book that sort of provokes and sort of pictures in your mind as to what's being described. They don't hang together in a narrative that you can follow, but I don't think that's to its loss. You just have to sort of hold your hands up when you dive into this book and go, I'm not going to look for meaning, I'm not going to look for coherence, I'm not going to look for a narrative through line, I'm just going to enjoy the book that I'm being offered. So I would give it, again, sort of 4 to 4.5 stars, because it's not a perfect read, because it is a bit beyond comprehension. But as I say, some of the sort of words that we're offered, some of the sentences are just supreme. 4.5 stars. And finally, to New Zealand author Pip Adam. This is called Audition. I'm not sure if you'd call it sci-fi, but basically, on Earth, some people have sort of started growing, and they've become giants. And it's an Earth that is obviously suffering from resource shortage, and also shortage of space, presumably because there's so many humans on the planet, and areas have been lost to environmental catastrophe. So a decision is made that these giants need to be removed, just because they take up too much space, too much resources, and they're going to be shot out into space. And in order to do that, they are sent to effectively a space school, where most of the learning is done through classrooms and lecturing, not, gravitational things. And these giants are manipulated. They're sort of effectively disarmed mentally, so they can't pose a threat. They can't challenge what's about to happen to them. They're not coming back. They don't know that, but they're not coming back. They're sort of taught how to read gauges and things, but are those gauges even real? Are they doing anything, or is it all being controlled by whoever's going to launch the space rockets out into space? So it's very manipulative. It's very exploitative, and these giants are very much moved around like sort of passive tools. And then we get sort of flashbacks into before the classroom, where we get, because their memories have basically been sort of also disarmed, that they don't seem to be in touch with who they were before their classroom. And indeed, one of the mantras that they're taught in the classroom is, nothing matters before the classroom. Time has no meaning before the classroom. And you realise that they're very much, the classroom is more like a prison, and that one of the three giants, who's called Alba, when her memories sort of come back, it's a very disturbing narration about her time being in jail, that she had assaulted one of the other people who became a giant, and was in jail with the third, who was called Stanley, who was transgender. So two of them were in jail, and Alba was a victim of one of them. But she went to visit both of them in jail, because they were cooking up a plan to escape, to use their giantness, their gigantism, to break through the prison and to escape. But before they can, they're sent off into the space teaching classroom. So it never comes to pass. So this seems to be about prison and oppressiveness. And then they're shot into space. And their craft is the only one. They seem to be the only 3 of the 18 crew of giants who survive. And they sort of shot into this where they land on a planet. And this is really, I mean, I didn't really enjoy the book at all, but it's when they're on this other planet and the descriptions of how things operate differently there, how society is very different there. I liked the alienness of it. It seemed to then be less about prison and incarceration and sort of brainwashing. This was having to recalibrate your senses, so a different sort of brainwashing, one in which you're notionally in control of it, to the new world, literally, the new societal organisation, the new people. These three are the aliens, but of course humans being what we are, we regard everything beyond human as an alien. And I still wasn't won over, but I did like the alienness of it. It seemed to be talking about colonialism and things like that. But as a whole, the book didn't work for me. There were sort of concepts that were never really explained, and you don't have to explain them. For example, the space rocket they were on was powered by their speech. They had to keep talking. And once they were shot into space, they sort of went on strike, all 18 of the crew, and refused to talk. And that sort of seemed to knock them all into a sort of slumber, or almost semi-comatose. It was only when they woke up and realised that they'd continued growing because they weren't powering the ship. Gravity was back at work, was unrestrained. Sorry, because gravity was not back in play. That they then grew, their bodies kept growing, so they were even bigger than they were before. It just felt like a sort of a random concept, both to talk to fuel the ship, and also the fact that if they refused to talk, then the lack of gravity meant they kept growing. It was just things like that that slightly sort of maddened me, because I couldn't really get to grips with them. So I didn't enjoy this read at all. I was going to give it 2 stars, but I did like its alienness, I have to say. So I gave it sort of 2.5, rounded up to 3 stars. Sorry, just going back to Aliocha Coll, I did want to say that one of the books this reminded me of, even though there's no direct link, is it reminded me of reading Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I just got that vibe from it. Anyway, so that was my reading week. And now to, we are July the 3rd, by the time this is uploaded it'll be July the 4th. So we are into the second 6 months of the year. So I thought I'd give my reading stats up to and including the 30th of June, the 6 months of the year to date. So I'd read 77 books in all, of which 58 were novels or novellas, 15 were poetry collections, and 4 were non-fiction. And of those 77 books, 40 were written by men and 37 were written by women. And in terms of geography, of the fiction, 13 were by British writers, 31 were by American writers, which is quite a lot proportionally, and 29 were for the rest of the world. And that breaks down into... So, from Africa there was 1 from Libya, 1 from Egypt. From Asia there's 1 from South Korea. From Central and Southern America, Latin America, 1 from Mexico, 2 from Canada, 1 from Brazil, 2 from Chile, and 3 from Argentina. And then in Europe it was 5 from France, 2 from Ireland, 2 from Denmark, then 1 from Spain, 1 from Portugal, 1 from the Netherlands, 1 from Switzerland, 1 from Austria, 1 from Croatia, 1 from Czechia, and 1 from Belarus. And of the fiction writers, so that's of the 58 and the poetry 73, 5 were by LGBTQ plus writers that I know of, and 8 were by persons of colour or First Nation writers. And then in terms of my rankings, there were 27 5-star reads, 28 4-star reads, 13 3-star reads, 9 2-star reads, and so far 0 1-star reads. So obviously I don't have a words book of the 6 months because there were no 1 stars. I will say that there were 3 new release books this year that I found incredibly disappointing and gave 2 stars to. Sorry, 2 of the 3 that I gave 2 stars to. One was Lauren Binet's book, Perspectives. One was Natasha Brown's book called Assembly. I thought Patricia's Lockwood, no one's talking about this, which is not a new book this year, was really poor. Gave that 2 stars. And I have to say I was disappointed in Matthias Enard's book, The Deserters. I gave it 3 stars. But actually, a lot of the new releases this year so far have been disappointing. So I'm rather holding out hope for the ones yet to come. And in terms of, so I've said there I had 27 5-star books. Now, the way I rate books is I often give 5-star books that I know are not perfect or flawless, but they meant a lot to me for whatever reason. But of those 27, most of them have no chance getting in my top 10 reads of the year. I mean, obviously, by definition, there's 27, so at least 17 of them couldn't, even if I didn't read another good book between now and the end of the year. But actually, of the ones that could qualify, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's only 8 of those 27 that could get into my top 10 reads of the year. My favourite book so far, I'd have to say, is Olga Ravin's My Work. And then other books with honourable mentions, Clare Pollard's Delphi. And I have to say, Charles Boyle's book, it has dogs in the title, can't remember. I'll post a link to my review of it. Those 3 books were quite similar in that it was sort of epigrammatic, short, punchy, not a sort of through-line narrative in sort of, you know, paragraphs, but very sort of chopped up into the chapters, which is definitely, as I said, that's something that I really like. Then we had 2 books, Ed Park's Same Bed, Different Dreams, and Avner Lander's The Delegation. Both, I don't like historical fiction. I really don't. I mean, I studied history at university. I'd had my fill of history. I've got a long video on Laurent Binet's wonderful HHHH, which talks about historical fiction versus history. But what these 2 did so brilliantly is because of the formalistic challenge their books presented, that they almost slipped in the historical narrative. So, for example, Avner Landers has 3 narratives. He has the historical narrative of a fundraising delegation of 2 Jews sent by Stalin to America to fundraise for the Soviet war efforts against the Nazis. And that is a fairly straight historical narrative, but under that is 2 other narratives. One is of the author Avner Landers in researching and writing this book, and then his sort of anxieties and fears about it. I just thought it was brilliant. And Ed Park's is about the history of Korea since Japanese occupation in the late 19th century through to obviously the Korean War in the 1950s and into modern Korea. And again, his sort of placing it in a sort of not quite whodunit contemporary thriller, but it's a sort of a chase for a manuscript, and that manuscript is the history of Korea in manuscript form. It's just supremely well done. I will leave links to my original reviews of these books, and then Evan Dara's last book called Earthquakes, or I think it was called Earthquakes or Earth Tremors, something like that. Again, I'll leave the link to it. I'm really bad at remembering titles of books. Evan Dara is just one of those writers. He's not prolific like Jeffrey Eugenides. He's not prolific, but every book of his is a 5-star read. Is terrific, and this was as well. Rebecca Watson, whose debut novel a few years ago was called Little Scratch, was very experimental in its form. This new one, again, I can't remember what it's called. Apologies. Is not as experimental, but in a way is much better. I really, really enjoyed this book. And then finally, a slightly standalone book in that it's not really linked to any of the others. Vincent Delacroix wrote a book about the boat people coming over the English Channel, some who died, some who are captured, some who make it, called Small Boats. And it's told from the point of view of a French Coast Guard officer who basically is blamed by the media for not sending the Coast Guard out to a migrant dinghy that was in distress and everyone on it drowned. And it's it's just a damn good story, damn well told, and a very live issue for the world, that of migration and desperate people undertaking, terrible journeys as they seek, to flee war, famine, environmental catastrophe to the countries that have largely caused these over history, these disasters. It's a fairly unique book amongst that list, in that it's not doing anything sort of flashy. It's not doing anything with form. It doesn't do anything with language. It just is really satisfying, fulfilling read. So there you have it. Thanks very much. Till next time.